"Come on, we need to get back to the tent. It's too dark," Taylor shouted after me. I stopped and turned my head to see her. She was at the top of the forested hill, where we had decided to set up a small camp with a few of our friends. Duke, an interesting, dark guy with a creepy sense of humor. Evelyn, the inspiration for our group. Elegant Taylor, and me, for friends. I started running up the rocky cliff. It got colder up there, oddly enough, in the shroud of what seemed like thousands of trees stretching for miles, hiding most of the cliff in darkness. I finally made it to where Duke, Taylor, and Evelyn sat laughing hysterically around a blazing campfire that shot bright sparks into the dark night sky. Duke finished telling another joke and smiled slightly as he watched Evelyn laugh uncontrollably, tipping over onto her back. Even Taylor was struggling not to follow Evelyn's example. I shook my head and tried to get their attention. They finally noticed me and, still laughing, gestured for me to sit on a low rock near the fire. After a few minutes, the laughter finally died down. Only the crackling of wood could be heard. Then Evelyn turned toward me. "Come on, now you have a story to tell." She threw a rock into the fire, and it sent a sheaf of sparks into the night sky. "Really? You're the main storyteller here, aren't you?" I grabbed a large marshmallow from the bag Taylor tossed me and strung it on a stick and shoved it into the fire. Duke backed me up. "Okay, I'll tell a story." Evelyn made herself comfortable on the rock. The wind blew against us and then died down. "The story I'm about to tell you probably happened right here." She leaned closer to us so she could look each of us in the eye. "It all started on a summer day, about 4 years ago. A few families agreed to go camping together and decided to go this way. They made their way through the woods while their children ran around and laughed merrily. They pitched their tents in a clearing, 4 adults and 12 children. In the evening, the children went to bed while the adults sat in front of the fire, just like we did right here, and talked in muffled voices so as not to wake the children. At midnight, they put out the fire and headed to their tents. At 4 a.m., one of the women woke up to check on the kids. She snuck over to the tents where the children were sleeping, carefully unzipped the door zipper, and cautiously peeked inside. The children were lying in their sleeping bags, eyes closed, some curled up against each other. They were breathing evenly and slowly, and she zipped up the tent and headed back out. Halfway there, the woman felt some unease and decided to return to the children's tents once more. She unzipped the entrance again and looked inside. She was overcome with horror. The children were gone. Only the sleeping bags remained, and the children themselves seemed to have vanished. She frantically ran to wake the other adults. The 2 men ran over to the tent and opened it to realize that this was indeed the case. They somehow managed to get 2 separate search parties together and set off into the woods, shouting the children's names loudly. Nothing. They searched for hours. Soon, sunlight was already beginning to break through the trees. Devastated, barely dragging their feet, they made their way back to camp. Some just stood there in shock, staring off into the distance. Finally, one of the older men approached the children's tent, and everyone heard his surprised cry. They rushed over to the tent and awed in disbelief. There were children lying quietly in the tent. It was as if they had not disappeared anywhere. The adults decided not to say anything to the children about it, so as not to scare them. After quickly packing up their things, they headed home. The children were excited, and their laughter echoed through the forest. They were jumping on boulders, running behind trees, playing with each other. All was well. Gradually, the children ran farther and farther away, but the adults could hear their laughter. The forest began to end, and a clearing appeared ahead. When the adults finally came to the clearing, they were stunned. The children had disappeared, but they could still hear their laughter nearby. They searched everywhere, but found no one. Gradually, the laughter began to fade and die down. The adults called the rescue team. Search helicopters, police with dogs, and volunteers searched the woods for a long time, but they never found the children. Evelyn fell silent, and silence fell on our camp. I looked fearfully into the depths of the dark forest, listening. And at that moment, I heard a distant child's laughter.